Halloween is basically right around the corner. I think it's time to read a really, really terrible thriller. So this is a bad faith, hateful, mean-spirited reading of The Housemaid is Watching by Frida McFadden. Now, I need to address something right off the bat. You might be thinking, hey there, that is the third in a series. And it is. And that's not something that I knew until I was 70 pages into the book. I just went to my local library. I went to the Frida McFadden section because I thought, I know this woman writes really shitty thrillers. And I picked what I thought would be the most entertaining book. Nowhere in this section were there any other books under the Housemaid title, so I just assumed this was a standalone book. Now, thank God, I have learned this can be read as a standalone book. I just might be missing some character development or like the completion of a character arc, something like that. But from what I've read so far, I doubt that I'm missing all that much. Though I will say, many of these complaints that I might have, maybe they will be solved if I read the other two books, but I will not be taking suggestions to read the other two books. This is enough for me. When I thought for a second there that I had read 70 pages of a Frida McFadden book that was going to be for nothing, I thought I was going to die. It's so horrible. I could not possibly subject myself to more than I already am going to, okay? Don't tell me to read the other two. I'm not going to do it. All right, before I start talking about the book, I do have to just briefly address this incredible cover. I really don't have anything to say about it other than this is awesome. This is so fucking great. And I looked up the other books in this series, and they have the same covers, and they're equally as awesome. So the book begins with a prologue in which someone, we don't know who, though I have my suspicions, is covered in blood, and they are trying to decide whether or not to clean themselves up or to run away. But they say, unfortunately, no matter how hard I scrub, it won't do a thing for the dead body lying smack in the middle of the pool of blood, which thrilled me. That is the exact corny cornball cheesiness that I am looking for in this hateful thriller reading. That's exactly what I wanted. I have read a lot of thrillers. I was a huge thriller reader in high school. That was the shit that kept me reading as I was trying to age out of YA. And this is exactly what I adore in a shitty, tropey, corny, awful thriller. This riled me up like nothing else. Unfortunately, oh my god, yes please. So the narrator of this prologue goes back and forth about whether or not they should clean themselves up or they should run away. It drags on for what should be a paragraph, and it ends up being 2 full pages. Now this is a pattern that you will continue to see in this book, making it unforgivably long, so much longer than it needs to be to tell this story, which so far 100 pages in, there is not a story. The narrator will have a decision to make, and she will almost every time explicitly, excruciatingly detail each possible outcome, often more than once, just slightly rephrased. As the narrator is sitting here painstakingly trying to figure out what to do, there's a knock at the door, and a familiar woman's voice calls out, hello. And they say, I'm not one for prayer, but at this point, I'm ready to get down on my knees. Well, I would, if doing so wouldn't get blood all over my knees. It seems like it's trying to have a very casual stream of consciousness almost kind of voice, but at the same time it's very staccato and overwritten, far too much to pull off like a humorous nonchalance like this. But the decision has been made for the narrator, so they run, and that ends a prologue that dragged on for so much longer than it needed to. There were so many extra words in here that gave us absolutely no information, literally could have been an email. Part 1 is 3 months earlier from Millie's perspective. Now, I've flipped through the book a little bit, and I have not seen any indication that we ever get any other perspective than Millie's, but it does tell us this is now Millie. I do know that Millie is the main character in the other 2 books, or at the very least, in the first book in this series, so it kind of makes sense. I would also be surprised if the prologue narrator was not Millie, considering that they have the exact same quirks in voice. However, at the same time, I don't think that Frida McFadden has shown herself to be good enough or exaggerated enough in writing a voice. I don't think this is voicey enough that I am certain she is able to differentiate between 2 narrators. So Millie has just moved into a new house with her family. Her annoying, hilarious 7-year-old son, Nico, her intelligent, quiet 11-year-old daughter, Ada, and her hot Italian husband, Enzo. She's just sitting around, surrounded by boxes, thinking about how much she loves this new house and how different it is from all the apartments that they lived in the Bronx. She's sitting there thinking when her kid, Nico, starts throwing baseballs around, and she says, shouldn't you be unpacking? Nico's boxes and furniture have all been deposited in his bedroom, so he should be unpacking. And I wrote here in my notes, literally 4 pages into the book, that I was not excited about the prospect of a thriller that thinks I'm so stupid it needs to repeat things twice to me like this. Little did innocent me at the time know what this book was going to do and how prevalent that was going to be. A few moments later, we get the most natural character description ever written. My 11-year-old daughter pops her head into the stairwell so that I can see her thick, wavy black hair and dark, dark eyes peeking out at me. I love it when a book forces you to be so aware of the limitations of its form. This is a book that won't let you forget that it's a book. It makes it feel as though these characters only exist after their introduction happens, which is actually crazy for this, considering that this is number 3 in a series. These characters, I think, have already been established in their universe. Millie asks her responsible, kind, maternal, emotional, subjective daughter to help her little brother unpack his room. And at the time I read this, I was going to let it slide. I didn't know that this was going to be a thing that continues happening, that Ada continues to be put into a parental role by her mother, and it's framed by her mother as like evidence of her good character and not a failing of her parents. It's not questioned in this book how Nico's behaviors are allowed and sometimes even encouraged by his parents because he is a boy, nor is it ever considered how Millie is implicated in this. It's always just like, Nico, isn't he such a little troublemaker? Don't we just let him get away with it at every turn? With the children gone to unpack, Millie is again thinking about how much she loves this house and how lucky they were to get it for 10% under asking price. All of her thoughts are very repetitive and one note, and all of her actions are very, very step by step. Truly, like, I hear a noise. I go to the door. I opened the door because I want to check out what the noise was. As if the implication of why she's opening the door is not very clear to the reader, as if we need that to be told to us. The noise she heard is just her husband moving a couch. Holding the other end of the couch is a friend who agreed to help them move. Now, this friend is never brought up again. I cannot emphasize how insignificant this friend is. I don't feel like I need to be told that this friend agreed to help them move. I think that Frida McFadden doesn't know that her readers are well aware of the concept of a friend helping you move. And it could have truly just said, his friend is holding... It didn't even need to say anyone is holding the other end of the couch. Who cares? We know people help people move. I don't need every single detail like this. The point of this scene is really just to introduce Enzo and tell us about how hot and strong he is. She says, and oh my God, he looks up at me, and when he grins, I melt. Is that normal? Do other women who are married to somebody for over 11 years still get wobbly in the knees over them sometimes? Line break. No? Just me? The new line for no, just me, let me know that this book is going to try to be quirky and relatable and funny, and I am gritting my teeth. I'm grinding them into little nubs on page 7. It then takes 3 paragraphs to tell us that someone in the house across the street is staring at them from the window. It is trying to set a tone here. I'll give it that. She says, well, there's nothing ominous about that. And I think that's both, like, it's playing both sides. It's trying to make her seem like naive and show her tendency towards suspicion, but it also doesn't want us to think that we're supposed to think a certain thing here. You know what I mean? Like, either we can think this is ominous and she's being silly, not thinking that it's ominous, or we can think this isn't ominous, someone's just watching you move in, and we're not frustrated with her immediately jumping to that conclusion. By the way, the address for the neighbor who's just standing there silhouetted in this house is 13 Locust Street, and I could not be more pleased with how on the nose that is. Sorry, 13, the evil number, and then a biblical plague. That's what we're getting. That is awesome. There's only 3 houses in this little cul-de-sac, and she meets the neighbors in the other house, not the one with the person standing in the window. This house is extravagantly large, and this neighbor is a woman named Suzette. Suzette is fake. She's uppity. She is judgmental, and also she's a whore. And you can tell because she comes out the little harlot that she is wearing high heels. Suzette says, oh, your house is so cute and small. And Millie thinks, is she insulting my beautiful house? And Suzette says, it's just so rustic. And Millie thinks, oh, she's definitely insulting my beautiful house. As if we never would have been able to figure that out. McFadden does this thing with her dialogue where she writes it so clearly. There is no room left for misinterpretation. It is exaggerated, it's on the nose, it's over the top, and yet still she feels the need to explain what's between the lines to us. Like in this conversation, Suzette invites them for dinner the following night, and she says, and I guess, ... your children can come too. And Millie thinks, seems like she doesn't want our children to come. Hello? You made that so clear. I would venture to estimate that so far, 90% of this book is filler, with the over explanations of the dialogue and the constant lingering on the same things over and over again. Like, she won't stop saying that Enzo is strong and handsome and he's so capable of moving them into this house. Like, listen to this, how absolutely redundant and needless this is. Enzo emerges from the truck, carrying more boxes, his t-shirt still clinging to his chest and his black hair damp. I remember filling one of those boxes with books and being worried that I had made it too heavy. And now he's carrying not only that box, but he's put another one on top of it. She said the same thing twice, did she not? And by the way, a thing that she has already said 25 times. How many of these words are unnecessary? Almost this entire paragraph is just telling us things that have already been established. It's not setting a tone, it's not developing the characters, it's not forwarding the narrative. It literally isn't doing anything. With how much she is focused on how strong and handsome and energetic Enzo is, I'm starting to imagine him as being like incredibly coked up. After the uncomfortable conversation with Suzette, who was all over Enzo, eyeing him up, touching him uncomfortably, Millie then goes back to thinking about how much she loves her house and how different it is from living in the Bronx, where all of the men were always eyeing Ada up and where they always felt at fear of being mugged. Now, I am not American. I don't live anywhere near New York, so I could be wrong about like general perceptions of the Bronx, but these ideas felt a little bit scary to me because I know that the Bronx, of all the boroughs in New York, has the highest percentage of non-white people living there, and I don't love the language that it's using to talk about the Bronx. Like, at one point she literally says, I was so scared there, I would make people hold their ID cards up to the peephole if I didn't know who they were when they knocked on my door. That's insane. And yes, that absolutely could be explained in the other two books, 100%. But this fear of being mugged and stuff like that, I don't know, it felt uncomfortable to me. And also kind of entirely unnecessary for this book, though again, I recognize I am missing 2 entire books worth of context that could make this make sense. I am kind of irritated knowing that the other books follow Millie. Not that I really care about her backstory, though it is always indicating that there's some incident that has happened in her past and she has this troubled life before her family. I don't really care. I think all thrillers love doing that. It's because I know that this being one book in a series that follows Millie, it means that no harm is probably going to come to her family unit, which is allowed. That can happen. I just think it's a little bit less interesting knowing that. Though at the same time, I will say I am almost certain that Enzo is going to cheat on her, that infidelity is going to play some role in here with how much she's focused on him being the perfect, most attractive partner ever. I just don't think that McFadden is going to disrupt her heroine's household. I think that all of the harm that's going to come in this book is going to come to people outside of it. Maybe because of what's happening in the household or the infidelity or something. I just don't think like that dead body that we saw in the prologue is ever going to be Enzo. You know what I mean? Though maybe. I could be wrong about that. And I would be impressed if McFadden killed the father of her heroine's children. That'd be awesome. Anyways, they have dinner that night and Nico says, I like this house, but I wish we lived in a house that was painted red and it had 2 yellow arches. And Millie thinks, okay, I think that my son's trying to say he wants to live in a McDonald's, as if that is not the most obvious universal reference of all time. Okay, then we get like a kind of sex chapter with Millie and Enzo, who has a wildly varying strength of Italian accent. Sometimes it reads as an Eastern European accent. I don't think that there is any pattern or linguistic reasoning to why he omits words or has specific grammar mistakes. I think that Frida McFadden is writing what she thinks an accent sounds like. And so sometimes he'll speak in absolutely perfect English. And sometimes he'll be like, you are doing the play dating with Nico. And it's like, how did we get here? It's incredibly inconsistent and distracting. Like Millie has said about 1,000 times, and I've also said 1,000 times, Enzo is perfect. And he's so hot. He's so much hotter than her. He's the perfect husband. He's attentive to her needs. Seems pretty clear that there's either going to be infidelity or the constant threat of infidelity from her sexy husband. Though anything could happen, I guess. Because literally, I'm 100 pages in and nothing has happened so far. It could go anywhere. It is definitely like a really typical kind of horror movie beginning here, where it's like the facade of the perfect house and the perfect life is slowly crumbling. While they're trying to christen the new house, Millie can't stop thinking about how there are no blinds on the windows because Suzette told her that that neighbor who was staring through the window at 13 Locust Street is a nosy busybody and she's unemployed and she spends all day staring through that window, watching everybody and making a fuss and complaining about things. And Millie's just thinking she's staring at us right now. But she's trying to remind herself about how happy she is here. She says, I am living the sort of domestic suburban life that I never dreamed of for myself. Not with Enzo, not with anyone. A lot of people would call it boring, but I love it. All I ever wanted was a normal, quiet sort of existence. So did you or did you not allow yourself to dream about this? Because I feel like you just said that you never even imagined, and now you're saying that's all you ever wanted. What is the truth? So the next day, the kids are going to their first day at a new school, and it's the middle of March. They pulled their kids out of school mid-year, which kind of feels like they're running from something, right? This is definitely something that I should maybe know from the first 2 books that I've missed. However, she does keep saying that their budget is very, very tight, and that's the reason why they had to pull them out mid-year. They couldn't afford to pay the rent and the mortgage at the same time. That makes sense. I kind of tend to believe her, considering how often she's bringing it up. She tells her shy, emotional, sensitive woman daughter, Ada, to just be herself. And then she thinks, I can't believe I said that. Telling someone to be themselves is like the worst advice ever. I've always hated it when people said that to me. But I don't have any better wisdom than that. If I did, I'd have more friends. Woof. I'm not even going to comment. I'm just going to let that sit there. Let's just take a moment of silence for that. Millie then takes her kids out to the bus stop where she meets this neighbor, Janice, who Suzette has said a lot of really mean things about. Janice is immediately described as being very old, way too old to have a son Nico's age, and her description is not flattering or kind. She's thin, she has wiry gray hair, she has spindly fingers. I don't really expect old people to be seen in a super positive light in this book that already has some crazy gender stuff going on, but it still felt a little bit off-putting to me. Her son, named Spencer, he is described as looking 2 years younger than Nico. He is also on a leash, okay? 3rd grade and he's on a leash. Janice is obviously incredibly overprotective, and she projects her fears onto Millie in the form of judgment and unasked for advice within 30 seconds of meeting her. She's very rude. Every sentence out of her mouth is a demand or an overstep. Like, are your children vaccinated? Do your children have lice? You can't let them walk to the bus stop on their own. It's literally across the street. Do you feel like a bad mother because you're not home with them all the time? And on and on and on. I think Janice's description is so over the top because it's a misdirect. She's being set up as this evil woman staring at them sinisterly through her window from across the street so that later on she can be revealed as misunderstood and she can probably make a sacrifice of some sort. That evening, they're getting ready for dinner at Suzette's house. Millie has been tasked with bringing dessert, and she's trying to rough up the apple pie that she brought from the supermarket to make it look a little bit more homemade, and she's stressing about Enzo being late, okay? She has already said that Enzo is pushing it as close as he can to the time that he can arrive home, and that they have 15 minutes before they have to get to Suzette's house. And yet, for some reason, she goes, Enzo is home. Thank God, since we don't have much time left. All she's been talking about for the last 2 pages is how they don't have much time left. Why are we saying it again? Do you think that I have not followed? I know that you're writing an airport read. I get it. I still think that your readers are more intelligent than you are giving them credit for. I don't know if these we get it sentences are coming off to you as egregious as they are to me, but when I read that, I feel like she is holding my hand and feeding me cookies while she reads a picture book to me. They arrive at Suzette's luxurious, child-free mansion, and the housemaid, Martha, opens the door. And Martha won't stop staring at Millie. And Millie thinks, what's so interesting? Do I have spinach in my teeth? Is there a celebrity I resemble and she wants an autograph? Which just, fuck. This humor is not landing for me. It's trying to be funny, and it is failing at every turn. At this dinner, Suzette will not stop touching up and flirting with Enzo, and Millie is finding herself getting more and more jealous. She's pretty used to women flirting with Enzo, considering how sexy he is. Did you know he's so hot? Except she's not usually jealous, but something about Suzette is getting under her skin. It could also be in part because Suzette is trying to undermine Millie any chance that she gets. Enzo and Suzette end up striking a deal. Suzette is a real estate agent, and Enzo's trying to build up his landscaping business in this new area, and she tells him that if he does work on her property, she'll add his name to the welcome package for new homeowners, and he'll have lots of interest in his company. Suzette also really pushes for them to hire Martha as their cleaning lady as well, but Millie is adamant that this isn't something that they can afford. A couple mornings later, Millie's trying to make herself breakfast, and there's a fantastic example of how over the top this is in being so step by step, and how hard it's trying and failing to be funny. Okay. I walk over to the kitchen and I pull out a carton of eggs. As I get older, I've been trying to eat healthy, and I've heard eggs are pretty healthy if you don't fry them in oil or butter, which seems patently unfair because that's what makes them taste the best. So I've started the water boiling for my oil/butter-free egg when the doorbell rings. And who is it but the cleaning lady Martha, who says, "Your husband called me and hired me." And Enzo says, "Yeah, I hired her. You used to be a cleaning lady. All I ever see you do is clean. So I thought she could help out around the house and you could get a bit of a break. And also, it's not that expensive." And Millie, who's like, "We're on the tightest budget ever. We're literally going broke," agrees. She says, "Oh, okay, it's fine. Enzo's doing something nice for me." Though we do get some of this back and forth in Millie's head as she's trying to make a decision or think through any option. I'd rather not have a cleaner who won't quit staring at me. But on the other hand, she's already working here. If we find someone else, I'll have to fire her. I've never fired anyone in my life, and I'm not looking forward to it. I honestly want to get a PDF of this and look up how many times it says "on the other hand." It won't stop. It's like McFadden thinks that we can't understand the concept of an option or a pro or a con. Immediately, not even a paragraph later, it again treats us like we're stupid by saying, "Nico is at a playdate today with Spencer, the boy who lives at 13 Locust with Janice." There have been 9 characters introduced in this book, as if we can't understand. Only one of them would ever be able to have a playdate with Nico, as if we don't remember who that is. Come on. Come on, give us a little more. We're human beings. We are reading your book. We are not the dumbest people on the planet. I am not 3 years old, okay? Janice seems weirdly disappointed when Millie goes to leave after dropping her son off, so she stays and they have a cup of horrible, grainy homemade juice that Janice made, while Janice kind of complains to her, is again like judgmental and rude, tells her about how nobody wanted to buy this house, how there was only one other offer and they pulled out. Janice says it's got to be something inside the house because outside everything looks fine to us. Millie hears this and she thinks about this scraping noise that she's been hearing at night sometimes. But she does not think to ask Janice anything about who lived in the house before her. Janice also says, "Your husband's over at Suzette's house right now. Did you know that?" And Millie didn't know that. And she is angry. When Enzo gets home, they fight. Millie says, "Why didn't you tell me you were going over there?" Enzo says, "It's a job. We need the money. She's already got me 2 jobs so far." Millie thinks, it's an extremely fair point. Building a business is all about word of mouth, and Suzette can help with word of mouth. Thank you. Oh my God. I actually had no idea what Enzo was saying until you repeated it in 2 different ways, and now I get it. I was never going to get there without you, though, and I really appreciate you doing that for me. Honestly, no one has treated me as well as Frida McFadden. They agree for Enzo to just let her know when he's going over to Suzette's place, and then they kiss and make up because really Millie doesn't have a leg to stand on here. That night, she hears the scraping noise, and she spends 3 pages going back and forth in her mind about whether or not to wake Enzo up, about whether or not to go investigate it on her own. Literally, well, if I wake him up, he's going to be upset. But if I don't wake him up, then I'm going to go have to look at it on my own, and I'm scared. Over and over, rephrased for 3 pages. She goes to check it out, and she thinks to herself that she kind of misses the old apartment where she could see everything in it by doing a 360 turn. Now, I need you to know how she spells 360. It's the number 3 spelled out, then 60. 3-60. 360. 360 turn. Then the sound stops and she doesn't know if she's relieved or disappointed. And though it feels patently obvious to me why she might be feeling either of those feelings, she explains it to us. She's relieved because now she doesn't have to be afraid she can go back to bed. But she's disappointed because now she's not going to figure out where this sound was coming from. Leaving so little up to the reader really hinders the experience of reading. Not being able to think for myself is flattening everything out because there are more reasons I can think of that Millie might be feeling either relieved or disappointed at the sound stopping. But in telling us exactly why, it's making everything so still. It's not ever allowing the reader to imagine anything other than exactly what it tells you. And that sucks. That is not fun. The next day, Millie is pathetically trying to recreate the Italian pasta dish that Suzette had made and Enzo had loved when she hears something breaking. And Nico, the child who breaks literally everything, has broken one of Suzette's windows. When Millie and Nico go over there, who do they find over at Suzette's house but Enzo and Suzette in a slutty little outfit? They force Suzette, who obviously has no interest in children, to allow Nico to pay off the debt of breaking her window by doing chores for her. She has no reason to agree to this, and yet she does. almost certainly for narrative reasons. Okay, great. Nico, who is known for breaking everything all the time, is now not being punished by either his mother or father, who seem absolutely inadequate at doing the dirty work of parenting. He's being punished by the woman whose property he damaged, a woman who in this book is, so far, meant to be some sort of villain. Sure. Okay. Then we get a scene of Millie at work. She's a social worker in a hospital, and she's trying to help arrange transportation back home for this dementia patient when the patient starts screaming that Millie is a thief. And even though it says that she has, I think, over 15, maybe closer to 20 years experience as a social worker, she's deeply rattled by this. She's like in the corner shaking. She has to go out, put her head between her knees. She gets her blood pressure checked by a nurse. Like, she almost faints because of this situation. It tries to explain this with her past. Her past being that this incident, I think, when she was a teenager, she killed a boy who was trying to assault her friend. She bashed him over the head until he stopped and then went to prison for 10 years. But even with this history, I still believe that her long experience as a social worker, specifically with old people, would have her a lot more accustomed to neurological decline and what that can look like. I don't think she would be this affected by it. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like this is just an excuse to tell us about her troubled past. At the very least, if this is how she reacts in this kind of situation, I feel like it would have come up a lot more in her career. That night at home, Millie and Enzo get into an argument because Millie wants to clean the house in preparation for the cleaning lady coming. Enzo doesn't understand this, but he does do as she pleases. He reaches into the cabinet that contains the dishwasher detergent. He fills the cup, then slams it closed and presses the button to start the cleaning cycle. How absolutely needless is almost all of that? The only important thing here is that he slams the dishwasher closed and that he's doing as she pleases, but he's angry about it. He resents it, okay? All you need to say is Enzo slammed the dishwasher and started the cycle. I've just saved you, 20 words? Why does she feel the need to tell us that he reaches into the cabinet, that he fills the cup, that he presses the button? It's absolutely meaningless. It is nothing. It's pure filler. And that is so much of this book. The vast majority of this book. Also part of this argument is her high blood pressure, which she found out about that day after freaking out at work. Enzo wants her to see a doctor, and he uses this to bring up the idea of life insurance policies, which Suzette told him about. And I think we're supposed to be suspicious of. They decide to do it, even though Millie really hates that he's following Suzette's orders and he's listening to her, and that even though they've spent the last 101 pages talking about how desperately broke they are, they're like, life insurance policies? Okay, we can fit that into the budget. What? So that's where I've landed 100 pages in. It is deeply boring so far. Entirely filler. Nothing is really happening. Nothing has happened. But I think that it's poorly written enough that there's a lot for me to nitpick on and to hate and to stew on why I hate so much, which is making it a very enjoyable read, just not for the author's intended reasons. I will say it is very light and very fluffy and easy to get through, which is great. That is what you want from a thriller. You also want pacing, which I'm finding is non-existent so far. But at least I feel compelled to read this, if only to hate on it. I'm going to read another 150 pages and then get back to you with an update about what happens in The Housemaid is Watching number 3 in the Housemaid series by Frida McFadden. I will see you later. Okay, I have now read up to the end of part 1 of The Housemaid is Watching, and everything I've complained about so far has gotten even worse, but at least now things are very slowly starting to happen. The last thing we talked about was a conversation between Enzo and Millie about health and seeing doctors and life insurance policies. That night, Ada says to Millie, "Are you dying?" She says, "I overheard your conversation with Dad." Millie thinks, "Oh, great. In our old apartment, we were acutely aware that the kids could hear through the paper-thin walls. Somehow, we have been under the misapprehension that it's different in this big house. But apparently, they can still hear everything. If I have to suffer through all of these insane over-explanations, I'm going to make you do it too." The next morning, Millie is convinced that someone has broken into their house. Don't be fooled, there is not an ounce of tension here. Enzo quickly tells her that it's just Martha, who he gave a key to. When Millie hears the vacuum, she thinks, okay, fine, I guess he's right. Most burglars don't take the time to vacuum the living room, so it must be Martha. This is not even 3 pages after the last egregious over-explanation that I just gave you the example of, okay? This book will not allow me to care about it. Why would I put any thought or energy into this if I know that everything is going to be explained to me in such excruciating, relentless detail like this? I know reading this that nothing is going to be left up to my imagination or my interpretation. As if I couldn't put the pieces together that the person downstairs vacuuming is probably Martha after just being told 2 sentences ago that the person downstairs is probably Martha. It is spoon feeding it to me. Frida McFadden is standing over me with a little spoon of slop on it going, here comes the airplane. When Millie goes downstairs, she catches Martha going through her desk drawers. There's a quick excuse about needing to write a note, but that doesn't curb Millie's suspicions. Then Millie goes into the living room and she sees that a vase has been broken. And immediately she blames this on Martha. Martha is like, I don't appreciate being accused like that. Also, why would I just break it and leave it there? I'm your cleaning lady. It's up to me to clean it. I'm not lying to you about not breaking it. Millie thinks, seriously? First she was going through my drawers. Now she's pretending she didn't break a vase when she obviously did. Thank you for reminding me that less than 1 page ago you caught her going through the drawers. I don't think I could have remembered on my own. I don't know if I'm crazy, but I really don't think it's necessary to remind us of literally the last thing that happened in the book. Then Enzo shows up downstairs and he says it was almost certainly Nico who did this. He's known for breaking things. They call Nico down and he says, oh yeah, I broke it when I was going to get a cup of water last night. Millie believes him, but she also thinks that's strange behavior from him, considering he just left this broken glass all over the place and didn't tell anyone about it. Martha is angry at being accused of breaking this vase. Of course she is. Why would she break it and why would she lie about it? It doesn't make any sense. It says, she rests her gaze squarely on my face. I did not appreciate being made to feel like a criminal. Criminal in italics, okay? It's pretty obvious what's going on here, at least to me. I'm sure it is to you too. And yet, Millie says, why did she look at me like that when she said the word criminal? God. Millie's like, what if she knows about my past? She can't stop thinking, I don't trust this woman, but that thread is pretty quickly dropped. The next day, Suzette's husband, Jonathan, is waiting on his porch, wanting to talk to Millie. And it says, I don't feel like having a conversation with my neighbor, but I also don't want to be rude, especially since Jonathan always seems extremely pleasant. I hope whatever he wants to speak to me about will be quick. I'm already feeling extremely stressed out. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, this is just more of that like back and forth of it telling us exactly what's going on in her mind as she's making a decision. I just feel like there are so many ways that this could have been expressed through gesture, and ever since I noticed that at this point in the book, I've realized that almost nothing in this book is expressed through gesture. Instead, it's all so clearly told to us. I'm not a writer, these are not the best examples, but I think that there are so many ways that she could have communicated hesitation. Millie could have sucked in a breath. She could have held back a sigh. She could have engaged with him begrudgingly but not stepped towards him. A better writer could have conveyed this differently without just telling us all of her emotions outright. Anyway, what Jonathan wants to talk about is Nico, who, if you remember, had been helping out around his house to pay off that broken window. He tells Millie that it's been nice having Nico around, but that recently he had broken a plate while unloading the dishwasher and just left it shattered all over the floor. This is trying to tell us something about Nico. I don't know what exactly. Jonathan tells Millie that they really don't need Nico to come around anymore, and then she notices movement in the window of his house, and so she really pathetically attempts to flirt with him in the way that Suzette tries to flirt with Enzo. He immediately steps back. It's a humiliating scene. Millie can't really get an understanding of Jonathan because he seems so much nicer and more chill than his wife, but then at the same time, he is married to this woman. It does seem clear, though, that he knew that she was watching him talk to Millie. The next day, Millie gets home late from work, and when she gets there, Enzo's truck is in the driveway, but inside the house, no one is there. The children aren't there, Enzo isn't there, and so she calls him by clicking on his name from my favorites, as if any of those details are necessary to the characters or the story. What happened to I called Enzo? He doesn't pick up, so she goes over to Suzette's place. She can hear his equipment in the backyard, which she feels the need to tell us is a good sign. However, when she gets there, Enzo is alone with Suzette. The children aren't there. And Millie thinks to herself, when I got home, I felt secure in the fact that the kids had to be safe with Enzo. But if he isn't with the kids, then where are they? I don't have to say it. It's too much information. It's just telling us everything we have obviously already intuited because these are the things that she would be thinking in this situation. They run back to the house and they discover that a plant has been moved, and under the stairs there's this seam ripped in the wallpaper in the shape of a door. Enzo swings it open. It's a door that had been covered up by the previous owners, and when he opens it, there's that scraping noise that Millie has been hearing at night. They do find the children in here, safe. Nico says that he found this little clubhouse and he thought it was fun to play hide and seek in here or something. It's really well insulated, so they couldn't hear anybody yelling their names. I do want to say about this scraping noise that does indicate that someone has been pulling this door open and shut over and over, because Millie had heard this scraping noise like on repeat over like a minute or so at a time. That doesn't really make sense, but whatever. We'll move past it. When they find the kids in there, Millie says, I don't even know which kid to hug first, but Enzo hugs Ada, so I hug Nico, as if that information is necessary, as if that's not just more words padding out this fucking book. Ada is crying, of course, because she's very sensitive and she cries about everything. But Millie realizes that when they open the door, Ada had already been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. And she's like, why would my daughter be crying in this little cutout under the stairs? Millie is relieved to have her children safe in her arms, but she's dead set on getting this door closed up immediately because she has a history with small spaces. This is one of very few references, I assume, to the previous books in the series. I think they are pretty lazily connected, other than having the same main characters. McFadden wanted to play both sides here. She wanted to cater to the audience that already cared about these characters and this series by referencing things, but she also wanted it to function as a standalone book. So we just get these little bits and pieces, these meaningless callbacks to the previous books every once in a while. And this, I think, is pretty clearly one of them. Or it's just referencing her time in prison. When she finds Enzo wallpapering over it the next morning, she says, "Fear grips me. We haven't looked inside this room since yesterday. What if one of the children went inside again? What if we sealed the room up with them trapped in there?" As if he hadn't checked, as if he hadn't done that, except he says, "Oh yeah, we can open it, but it's covered in glue." And then she goes, "He makes a good point." There's glue completely coating the wall, which would make it exceptionally hard to open. What the fuck? That has to be the worst one, right? I can't keep coming up with comments about how horribly this book is written and how stupid it thinks I am. Later that day, Millie's at work when she gets an urgent phone call that she needs to get to her kid's school ASAP. She rushes over so fast that she nearly goes through a red light, which is a nitpick from me, but I've never heard anyone say that in that way. Her kids are okay, but Nico is in trouble for fist fighting at school and he gets suspended for the week. He punched a kid and almost broke his nose after this kid was being mean to a girl. And Enzo says, "Oh, so my kid stands up for a girl and now he's in trouble?" And I marked that at the time because I thought it might be indicative of some questionable ideas about gender, about women as beings that need to be protected by men. But I thought, you know what? This is a throwaway comment. I could be reading into things. I could be wrong. Well, let's just put a pin in that for like literally 30 seconds because it is going to come back almost immediately. A couple days later, Enzo mentions to Millie that $50 has gone missing from the drawer and she immediately thinks that's the house cleaner's doing. As you might guess, it does take us through Millie's stupid fucking thought process where she thinks, well, Martha's really good at her job. She's really efficient and she does a good job cleaning, but I don't really want someone working for us if she's going to steal from us. I think I would hate this a little bit less if there were any complexities to Millie's thought processes. If she thought anything other than exactly the bare minimum of what someone would think in any situation that she's in. Millie does finally catch Martha in the act. She watches as Martha slips a necklace into her pocket and she fires her on the spot. And Martha says, "If you tell Suzette about me stealing from you, I'm going to tell her that you're an ex-con." In this confrontation, Millie says she notices that Martha wipes her shaking hands on her apron, okay? But then, not even one page later, the chapter ends with this sentence. "It's only as she turns the lock to get out that I notice her hands are shaking." But you just, literally just said that her hands were shaking. And here's where we come back to that pin, because Enzo, he's surprised that Millie has fired Martha, and he also thinks that Martha deserves her last paycheck. And Millie thinks to herself, Enzo's always had a soft spot for women. He thinks they're not capable of doing harm. Is that a soft spot? Or is that just like plain, pure, simple misogyny? The next scene is the entire family at Nico's Little League game. Nico's up to bat, and Millie thinks he hasn't had a hit all day, and he's got that frustrated look he gets on his face sometimes. I hope he gets a hit this time. As if I could not have drawn the conclusion that this mother would want her son to hit the ball at his baseball game. as if that needed to be told to me. I'm going crazy. Nico ends up hitting the ball, but he doesn't make it to the base in time. And in his anger at the umpire's ruling, he just like punches the kid on first base in the stomach, drops him, and is booted from Little Leagues. They have a zero tolerance policy for violence. Nico doesn't really seem to regret his actions here or really care that he can't play baseball anymore, which was like his one true passion. So Millie starts Googling, is my child a psychopath? And I want to say I'm well aware that this scene is trying to show us that Millie is overreacting, that she is being dramatic, and that she feels lost as a mother. But she's looking up characteristics of child psychopaths, and one of them is constant lying. And she thinks to herself, well, he didn't tell us about that vase that he broke until we confronted him, except that's not lying at all. That literally isn't lying. He said right away, yeah, I broke it. Sorry about that. I did it in the middle of the night and everyone was sleeping. She's like, oh my God, we need to get him into therapy. But Enzo really has the opinions of like, boys will be boys. And absolutely, my son is not going into therapy. That's for wussies. The next morning, Suzette catches Millie as she's heading home from taking her children to the bus stop to tell her, hey, you're taking your garbage out too early at night. We have to like sit there eating dinner and looking at your garbage on the street and it's unsightly. So I'm going to need you to take it out no earlier than 11 p.m. This is crazy. It's showing how much of a bitch Suzette is. I mean, come on. How do we expect the women other than the main character to be portrayed in this book? The important thing that happens here is that a plumber shows up, a plumber that Millie had hired a couple days before, and he gets out of the truck angry. He's saying, you wrote me a check and it bounced. You're trying to steal from me. I'm not leaving until you pay me in cash. Millie's like, I know we had enough in our bank account to cover the $300 plumbing fee, but I don't have any cash right now. Suzette says, oh, don't worry, I can deal with it. Now, Millie in the narrative has made it very clear that this was a $300 charge. Nowhere has that been said in this conversation, and yet somehow Suzette knows exactly how much money to give the plumber. She even says, it's all there as he's counting through it. That's not suspicious, though. That is just a plot hole. Anyway, the important thing here is what happened to the money in Millie and Enzo's bank account, right? I guess also another question is why would Suzette, who's been shown to be like a cruel, judgmental, selfish person, just cover this cost for Millie, who she obviously doesn't like very much? Your guess is as good as mine. Millie checks their bank account and she finds that there is only $200 left in there. She calls the bank and they say, yeah, your husband took out $1,000 just a couple days ago. And she's like, what? Why would he do that without telling me? Which, okay, to be fair, $1,000 is a lot more than $300. But Millie had hired this plumber in secret because Enzo was certain that he could fix the toilet on his own and he obviously couldn't do it. So she was going to take out that $300 for the plumber without telling him. Again, it is a very big difference. $1,000 is 80% of $1,200. But I still think $300 is a big enough charge that if your family of 4 is surviving with $1,200 in the bank account, you would need to tell your husband if you were taking out $300. The same way he absolutely needs to tell you if he's taking out $1,000. There's no indication that Millie or the narrative believes that to be true, though. That completely dropped. The plumber thing really means nothing. She confronts Enzo, and he says, I needed to replace some of the equipment at work, but I'm going to have that money back in the bank account within a couple of days. Don't worry about it. And she can't help but think, he's lying to me. A little while later, she hears the back door open and she catches Nico sneaking out. But he says, I was just going over to Spencer's house. Now, the last time that Millie talked to Janice, Janice said, your son will not go anywhere near my child now that he's been suspended. He's a bad influence. I don't want him around. Millie thinks, oh, that's nice that she changed her mind. Though I think we are supposed to know as the reader that Janice has been shown to be far too rigid to change her mind about something like that. She lets Nico go on his way, and then she notices in the corner of the yard, Enzo is talking on the phone quietly with a coy little smile on his face. He comes over after a minute, and he tells her, there are 2 huge new potential clients, and I have a meeting with them tomorrow. Millie's like, is that who was on the phone? He's like, no, that was Suzette on the phone. He says, we're having a meeting with Suzette tomorrow on a private beach. And Millie goes, well, you have to take the children. And also you have to take me. And I don't think that we are supposed to see this as unreasonable as it actually is, because Enzo doesn't really put up any fight. He says, okay, yeah, fine, I'll talk to Suzette. And the next thing you know, they're all in the car on the way to the beach the next day. On the way over, Millie says Enzo is driving, and as usual, he's driving way too fast. I thought he would stop doing that after we had kids, but he still does it. Again, I just think this is stupid. Like, you just said the same thing twice. He ends up getting pulled over, but he manages to smooth talk and lie his way out of a ticket, and Millie thinks, wow, he just lied to that police officer so easily. And it was so believable, too. At the beach, Suzette, as expected, is romping around in a skimpy little bikini, while Millie is a modest, respectable, average, relatable woman. Suzette says to her, what an ... interesting cover-up you have on. I love how you don't feel like you need to spend a ton of money on a beach outfit. And as if her intentions were not patently obvious, Millie thinks, that was a backhanded compliment. Oh my god. The potential clients that they were supposed to meet with ended up canceling, and I think there's the implicit idea here that they were never real, but it also doesn't really make sense because Suzette's husband is here. It doesn't really make sense to think of like Suzette was trying to get Enzo to come to the beach with her so she could show off her hot bod. I don't know, whatever. Suzette, though, is trying to show off for Enzo in front of his wife and her own husband, who she very rudely tells to stay back when she goes for a swim with Enzo and the children. Millie also doesn't want to swim, so she is alone with Jonathan, and she asks him what that was about. But Jonathan won't really engage about his wife's controlling nature with Millie. They don't really know each other. Millie looks out at the water, and she can see Nico talking to Suzette with this weird expression on his face, and she had also noticed him earlier glaring at Suzette. She turns away, and then she's drawn back to the ocean with the sound of screaming. Next chapter, Enzo is carrying Suzette out of the water, and Millie wants to believe that she has faked a near-death experience, pretended to drown, so that Enzo would be her hero and save her. But she can tell that Suzette is in actual real distress. And Suzette says, something grabbed my leg and tried to pull me under. So they pack up and go home, and Millie obviously is upset at Enzo for saving Suzette, for letting her hold his hand, for helping her to the car afterwards, and for not entertaining her idea that it was Nico that was pulling Suzette under the water. That night, Millie wakes up, and Enzo isn't in bed. She hears his truck pull into the driveway, and he gets into the room, and he's surprised to find her awake, and he says, I was just getting a glass of water. And she's like, really? In jeans and socks? You were getting a glass of water? And he goes, okay, fine. I was just going for a drive. I couldn't sleep. I just didn't want you to worry. And she just can't stop thinking about how easily he lied to that police officer, and about how when he gets into bed, he smells like Suzette's perfume. A couple days later, she is absolutely plagued with the idea that Enzo is cheating on her. She gets home from work, and his truck is in the driveway, but he's not home. So she storms over to Suzette's place, and she bangs down the door. Nobody answers, and she can't hear his equipment in the backyard. She thinks that she's about to catch him in the act. So she lets herself into the house, and she calls out Suzette's name, she calls out Enzo's name, and what does she find but Jonathan's dead body with his throat slit? And that is where part 1 ends. So maybe there's 2 deaths in this book, and I'm wrong about this, but I think this is telling us that the very first person that we heard from in that prologue is not Millie, which is disappointing considering that that person has the exact same voice as Millie, speaks exactly like her. I also noticed how in the prologue, someone rings the doorbell, which Millie does do, and then says hello, opens the door and says hello. That is not what Millie does. Millie opens the door and she calls out Suzette's name. Again, maybe there are 2 deaths in this book, but why would you not make that match up? Was it that hard to make that match up? I am having so many thoughts about this book. Particularly, there are so many things that I want to say about gender and about how the women who are not the main character are treated and portrayed by the narrative, by their descriptions. But I want to kind of hold off, lest I'm proven wrong by turns that this book may take. Because I think there is potential for it to turn all of that around, for it to have set something up and then be like, haha, look, women can be evil too, or like, okay, well, no, it has shown that women can be evil, but not that women can like cause physical harm. That is the thing that it seems like this book believes is just something that men do, whereas women are like catty bitches. And I think those things could be turned on their head. I'm not necessarily expecting it, but I would be happy to be proven wrong. So I'm not going to say anything yet. I'll hold off till the end. I still have the same complaints as the last time that I spoke to you. It's complaints that I have said ad nauseum. I'm not going to pull a Frida McFadden. I'm not going to over-explain them yet again. I think that obviously this book is not good so far, and it's not going to just turn around and become good. All of these things that I hate so much about it are almost certainly going to persist until the end. But I am very excited to see what happens now that things are actually happening. So I'm going to read maybe the rest of it, maybe just another 100 pages, and then get back to you and tell you about what happens in The Housemaid is Watching by Frida McFadden. Wow, what a book. Okay, see you later. I've now read to part 3. I have 100 pages left in the book, and I am so ready to talk to you about what's happened. This is some of the most insane pacing in any book I've ever read. It feels like it's been 10,000 years since I updated you last. The last thing I said was that Millie found Jonathan's body. She immediately rushes over to her own house, and what does she find but her husband at the sink washing off his blood-covered hands. He says, "I swear I just cut myself. Nothing's wrong. It's just a little cut. Hands bleed a lot." She says, "I just found Jonathan's dead body in the house beside us." And he's like, "It wasn't me, I promise." But Millie thinks, "I'm just gonna say it. There's no way a cut created that much blood, because Enzo has blood like all over his shirt, the sink is red, and the seeds of suspicion have been the only thing that has happened in this book so far." She thinks, "When I think about Jonathan lying on the floor of the living room with his throat slashed open, I don't want to think about the fact that my husband could be responsible for doing something like that." I'm like running out of things to say. I almost kind of want to make a joke that Frida McFadden would make here and be like, "Okay, Captain Obvious, she is getting in my head. She's breached containment." But there's no time for any explanations or to grill him. The police have showed up at their neighbor's house. Millie tells him, "Go upstairs and change your shirt right now." Which like kind of makes sense, but also kind of doesn't. I get that immediately it looks suspicious, but if it's his blood, it's his blood, and that's pretty easy to clear up. A detective named Willard comes over, and Millie tells him that she was going to call the cops, but she didn't have time. They already showed up by the time she got to her phone. He tells her that the next door neighbor, Janice, saw Enzo go into the house, heard a commotion, and called the police. And Janice did confirm Millie's story by saying that she had already called the police when she saw Millie go into the house. Janice also told the police something that she's very gleefully told to Millie multiple times now, which is that she often sees Enzo going into Suzette's house. Now the police think that there's an affair going on. They also know that money is tight with Enzo and Suzette, and that Suzette had a large life insurance policy out on Jonathan, and she was the sole beneficiary. So it seems like Enzo is suspect number 1 here. They interview him as well, and then Enzo and Millie decide that they need to call an old friend, Benny Ramirez, a detective for the NYPD. This is an obvious reference to the first 2 books that I don't know, but it's pretty meaningless. Like, I know I'm missing out on the context of their relationship, and maybe his appearance would have some sort of impact to me as the reader if I had already read the first 2 books. But I don't think it really matters in the story that I don't know who he is. Benny tells her not to worry. Everything's going to be okay. It'll all blow over. There's no reason for her and Enzo to be suspects. But they are called into the police station the next morning. Before they go, Millie takes her kids to the bus stop, and Spencer and Nico ask if they can have a play date. And Janice says, "Absolutely not. I told you that you are not allowed to hang out with this boy after he was suspended from school." And Millie's like, "What? I thought you had changed your mind about that." And she's like, "I would never change my mind about that." And Spencer, no, Nico, the other child, says, "Yeah, I wasn't actually going over to Spencer's house. I was just playing out in the street by myself." Millie's like, "I don't really believe that." But then the bus comes, saved by the bell. At the station, the detective is questioning Millie mostly about her husband. Even without the blood-stained shirt, he still looks pretty suspicious here. The detective tells her that they found out that her husband has recently illegally purchased a gun with cash, but that is somehow not the big bombshell, I think because Jonathan wasn't killed with a gun. The bombshell is that 4 nights ago, on the night that Enzo showed up in the middle of the night, after getting out of his truck and said, "I was just going for a drive," he had actually checked into a motel with Suzette. He is fucking cheating on her. So it seems like a slam dunk. The detectives keep Enzo in for questioning for hours. There is no concept of Millie having any real feelings about this. Sitting in this police station for hours, thinking that it's been fully confirmed to her that her husband is cheating on her. Millie doesn't have an inner world. None of these characters have an inner world. So it's kind of just like they held my husband for hours, and then we got into the car and he told me what the real story was. And that's it. She has no emotions. Enzo says they're right. I was at a motel 4 nights ago, but not with Suzette. I was with Martha. And Millie thinks, wow, well, that old hag is the last person I thought my husband will be cheating on me with, but I guess nothing can surprise me at this point, which is just like such a nice way to talk about her. We just talk about all the women in this book in such a kind-hearted way. Enzo says that Martha's husband was abusing her, and he could tell from the minute he met her. Now, I think that this is something that makes more sense if you've read the first two books. I believe the first two books have something to do with Millie and Enzo as this team that saves women from abusive relationships. So I think it is implausible, but a little bit more forgivable having that context. And considering how full of holes this book is, I think that we can just accept that Enzo is so easily able to recognize a stranger's domestic situation. Enzo says that he sensed it when he first met Martha, but it was confirmed fully for him when he went to go give her her last paycheck against Millie's wishes, and he saw that she was covered in bruises. She told him that she was forced to steal things from her clients because her husband took all of her paychecks, and she was trying to save up enough money to leave. So Enzo took out that $1,000. He bought her a gun in case her husband followed her across the country, and then he helped her get on her way to escape her abusive situation. And his excuse for not telling Millie any of this is that he was worried about her blood pressure. Now, I hate this. I think that's a really terrible justification, obviously, but I think that it could have been okay. I don't think it ever could have been like totally acceptable to me, but Frida McFadden is a physician. I think that she could have come up with a much better way for stress to like materially affect her character. I think that Millie could have like gotten nauseous or gotten dizzy or felt like she was having a heart attack in moments of high stress, and then it would have made a little bit more sense to keep things from her if it was like episodic the way that she reacted to stress. But instead it's just this really abstract thing of having high blood pressure that she only found out on a whim. Millie still thinks that Enzo is hiding something from her, but she largely believes him now. There is no indication in this first person narration that any of this roller coaster of emotions has had any impact on Millie. I literally don't know her at all, besides what she outright tells me. And what she outright tells me is the absolute bare minimum for what I think she would be thinking in any given moment. Back at home, their NYPD detective friend Benny has shown up to support them, and he has brought along a public defender, Cecilia. Now, this is the first time in the book where I actually felt like I was reading a sequel. Cecilia is, I think, the daughter of the family that Millie works for in the first book in the series, and it's a big moment for these characters to meet up again and to see Cecilia as very successful and mature and not like the 10-year-old that she was in the first book. Cecilia tells them that the police have even more on Enzo now, that they know about his life in Italy before he met Millie, which is something that he's largely kept from her. They know that he worked for this man who was like part of the mob in Italy, and he was kind of like his little henchman. This man was the man who killed Enzo's sister, the man who Enzo beat almost to death before coming to America. Millie knew about what happened to his sister and the beating, but she didn't know that Enzo had been working for this very evil man, and Enzo is deeply ashamed of it, and this, to him, is why his sister died. He thinks that they never would have got together if he wasn't working for this man, okay? This is also the reason that Enzo sees all women as victims first and foremost. When Cecilia says the name of this mob guy and the color drains from Enzo's face, Millie has to ask who they're talking about, and Enzo says, "Dario was my sister's husband." Millie thinks, his sister's husband. Okay, now it makes sense that that name upset him so much. Antonia was abused by her husband for many years until he finally ended up killing her. So, like, we already know all of that. That is literally the only thing that we know about Enzo's past in this story. I'm sure there's more in the other two books. But in this book, that's all we've been told about Enzo. I don't need her to repeat it to me. Like, Enzo's sister having died in a domestic abuse situation is very much character defining for him in the absence of anything else. And yet still, Millie's like, let me tell you exactly why he's upset about this. In this conversation, Enzo also brings up how Janice might not have actually seen everything, how there is a way to get in through the backyard without coming into the cul-de-sac. And everyone's like, well, you were in the backyard. How did you not see anything? And he says, my equipment was really loud. I was back and forth between our yards. I could have just missed whoever came into the house and killed Jonathan. So that night, like the dunce that she is, Millie decides to go snooping around in Jonathan and Suzette's yard to try to see if it's true that there's a way you can enter from the back. What? And so obviously, she's interrupted by Suzette. There's no fear here. There's no tension. It ends the chapter on, the intruder is here when she hears someone in the bushes, but there are so many innocent people that this person could be, and no sense of danger has ever been established in this story. So you're basically just sitting around waiting for her to reveal that the person is Suzette, because of course it is. Suzette's like, okay, haven't you bothered me enough? Your husband literally killed my husband. Janice saw him go in there. She also tells Millie, your husband was obsessed with me. I couldn't get him to leave me alone. He was unhappy in the marriage with you because he felt like you got married in a rush because you were pregnant. None of this seems true, except it's weird that Suzette knows that they got married because she was pregnant with Ada. I think that this point is meant to give Suzette a little bit of credibility in a story that she's telling that is obviously untrue, just to muddy the waters a little bit more. The next morning, the family is awoken to the police at the door with a search warrant. Enzo says they're not going to find anything. We're innocent. Take the kids out for breakfast and then take them to school. At breakfast, she's trying to explain to the kids that the police are searching our house, but it's not because any of us did anything wrong. They're not going to find anything. They're just searching to prove that nobody did anything wrong. And the kids are like, that doesn't make any sense. And she thinks, it was so much easier when they were little and accepted everything I said. Oh, wait, that never used to happen. Okay, I'm sorry. It's so fucking insufferable. What an insufferable voice. I can't stand it anymore. She drops them off and then she makes a stop to try to confirm her husband's story. She goes to Martha's house, and it's a bad neighborhood because that's where abusers live, in bad neighborhoods, and there's nothing to unpack there. There's no weight behind that idea. She gets there and this is how she describes it. She says, I walk toward the front steps of the house, looking around for some sort of guard dog racing out at me. This somehow looks like the sort of house that would have a terrifying guard dog guarding it. What the hell? First of all, she's saying sort of twice in 2 sentences. That's always something that I'm going to hate. But this really, more than any of the repeated explanations that I've said to you so far, feels like it was just accidentally left in. This feels like a sentence that was rephrased and the original is also still in there by accident. It feels like something missed in editing. She has quite literally said the exact same thing 2 times and also used sort of in 2 sentences really quickly back to back. That's not good writing. That is so terrible. It's just padding out this book. It's making it so much longer than it needs to be. I honestly think that if you deleted all of the double explanations in here, it would be about 2/3 the size that it is right now. Martha's shitty looking husband, because you can tell by the way a man looks if he's beating his wife. Okay, whatever. He does confirm Enzo's story. He says that Martha has run off and abandoned him. Back at home after the search, Enzo and Millie are cleaning up when they get a call from Cecilia, who says that the police have found what they're calling a slam dunk and they're testing it right now. The next morning, the family is sitting around eating pancakes with what should be a palpable tension in the air, but obviously is not there. Listen to how Millie describes this pancake making. I am using the pancake batter that comes from the grocery store, where all I have to do is add water and mix. Then I pour little circles into the frying pan with lots of oil. And then my final touch is the chocolate chips. I put about 8 or 9 chips in each pancake. What are we doing? What is the point of this? This is absolute insanity. Never in my life did I even consider it a possibility for someone to tell me how many chocolate chips they're putting in each pancake. Hello? What happened to I made pancakes for breakfast? It's insanity. In what world would this be pertinent to the situation at hand? I can see this being some sort of device to show how she's focusing on the little details while this crazy big thing that she can't even deal with is happening, while her husband might be getting arrested at any moment. That is not the situation, though. That is just how this book is written. It is so step by step. I walk to the kitchen. I open the fridge. I grab an egg from the carton. I put on a pot of water to boil the egg. Like, that literally is just how she describes the cooking scenes. I cannot believe it. And then Cecilia shows up unexpectedly, and she says, we need to talk right now. The police are on their way with an arrest warrant for Enzo. They found the murder weapon in your house. It was Enzo's pocket knife, something that was very unsubtly referenced earlier in the book. It was wiped clean, but Jonathan's DNA was still on it. And Enzo goes, oh my God, I thought I had wiped it all off. And then he says, Millie, I've been lying to you. It was me who killed Jonathan. He says, I did it for the insurance money because we're so broke. And then the police are there and they have whisked him away. Now, I wish so badly that there was something here about how Millie feels, even if she can't feel anything in this moment of like extreme shock and trauma. I want access to that emptiness, but it doesn't even try to go there. It doesn't try to explore Millie's inner worlds, her emotions, her thoughts, even. This woman who is now left in the aftermath of her husband murdering a man, needing to tell her children that he's been arrested on murder charges. No, there's no Frida McFadden putting herself in her character's shoes at any point in this book ever. There's nothing here. Millie heads upstairs to tell her kids what happened. And guess what? Guess what happens? Ada says, "It wasn't Dad. I know it wasn't Dad because I killed Jonathan." And that is where part 2 or part 3, wherever we are, ends. Even without reading the attempt at the child's perspective, this is just so fucking dumb. I love it. The entire formula for this book is giving you alternate explanations for situations that it wants you to believe in the Occam's razor version of, but explanations that you never could have come to on your own through what the book has given you. It's just like, oh, all of a sudden now this is true, but you had nothing that would ever have pointed you in that direction. It's ridiculous. It's the cheapest way to write a thriller. It's unbelievably lame and exactly what I expected. Like, we never could have guessed this explanation that Enzo has of helping Martha. It's something that we needed to wait for him to tell us about. Sure, you could think about whether or not you believed that he was cheating, and that is something that the book wants you to think about, but it can never be anything other than your own gut instinct. It's never going to be something that you can piece together through the information given in the book, or that you can look back on and understand in hindsight. And that's because, like I've said many times, this book doesn't want you to pull a muscle thinking about it. It wants to lay itself out on a platter for you, but in the worst way. In the way where nothing can ever be mysterious or require any thought or sleuthing. The way where the main character is stupid and she treats you like you're stupid too. The way that doesn't leave anything unspoken or implied. It's honestly insane. I've never read a thriller or an airport read like this book, and I say that in an incredibly negative way. I feel like it is throwing away the best parts of its genre, and I cannot understand to what end, but I am thrilled to see where this is gonna fucking go. Because you know the rest of this book is going to be absolute dog water, and it's going to be awesome. I will talk to you when I'm finished with it. I have finished The Housemaid, and we need to talk about this stupid bullshit. The last thing that happened was that Ada confessed to Jonathan's murder, and then it switches to her perspective. And like I knew it would, it's a very, very poorly written child's perspective. These are very common, very easy to do, and so distracting. It either goes so far in the direction of like trying to establish it as a child's voice and proving that the author thinks very little of the age that the narrator is, doesn't really remember what it's like to be that age, doesn't know how experienced that child is, often writes them as very dumb. I think adults chronically underestimate children, and you can always see that in a poorly written child's perspective. Or what you see is not even attempting to do it and just writing the child like it's an adult. That's equally as distracting, but I think we all know that Frida McFadden did the first one. Ada's narration is wildly inconsistent. It is both, as an 11-year-old, her first day on planet Earth, and she says things like, Nico said agreeably, or my mom deals with things in a calm and rational manner. It's not that I think that 11-year-olds don't have a concept of agreeability or rationality. I don't think that they use those words to describe those concepts at that age. And this especially stands out because, like I said, other than word choice, Ada narrates like a 5-year-old. Like a boy at school is bothering her, and he tells her, if you read too much, your eyes are gonna fall out. They're 11. She says, that is so not true. My mommy likes to read, and her eyeballs have not fallen out. They are 11. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this. They're 11. If you're going to undertake the task of writing from a child's point of view, you have a responsibility to, at least to some degree, understand the amount and the rate of development that happens in childhood. She's 11 years old. She knows her eyes aren't going to fucking fall out. It pisses me off. So anyway, I just really want you to have a bit of a grasp on how Ada's chapters are told and why I'm probably going to sound really fed up with them. The overly stylized and inaccurate voice doesn't help how boring Ada's chapters are because they are just retelling us everything that's already happened without offering all that much insight into her perspective. Instead of allowing us into her interior, it's just like, my name is Ada. I am in 5th grade. Tomorrow we are moving into a new house. And you're like, oh my God, I don't care. Because this is not telling us anything about Ada, I think this is just a way to pad out the book and make the pacing a little bit less insane in these last 150 pages. It drops this big bombshell: Ada killed Jonathan, and then it wants you to have to wait to learn the how and why so that everything's not so fast and insane. But I think that that is a really cheap way of building suspense and making you care more about the reveals and waiting for the reveals. I do love it when a book goes back and forth between perspective or in time, and it allows you to care a lot about both perspectives. That is a good way of building suspense if you can do it right. Frida McFadden is not a talented author. Ada talks a little bit about how she wasn't excited to move and how it's hard being the new kid at school, especially when there's a boy who won't stop following you around and telling you that it's not safe for you to wait outside on your own because a couple years ago, a kid named Braden Lundy got kidnapped a few towns over, and then he's grabbing your wrist and he's trying to hold your hand and he won't let go of you, and then now your dad's there and he's yelling at the kid and he's giving you his pocket knife. Enzo, as we know, has this perception of women as either perpetual or at the very least potential victims, and of men as perpetrators. So he's enraged to find his daughter being harassed by this little boy, and he gives her a knife. She's 11 years old. He gives her a knife. He says, if a boy ever does that again, stab him in the stomach and twist the knife. Ada does become obsessed with this missing boy that the other boy mentioned. He has been mentioned before in the book. Janice told Millie that he's the reason why she needs to be more watchful of her children, and Suzette said Janice is crazy. That thing that happened with the boy was a custody dispute. It's not stranger danger. But Ada has only ever heard this other boy's version of the story. So she's imagining him as like her little brother. She feels very sorry for him. She feels very sad about it. She also feels very protective of her brother now that she's heard this story. Ada also feels protective of him because she has noticed that ever since Nico started going over to the neighbor's house to do chores, he's been acting really differently. He's a lot quieter. He doesn't finish his dinners. He won't talk to her. One day he comes home and he's peed his pants. And she's like, this is very strange. He's 9 years old. He shouldn't be peeing his pants. He says, I just held it for too long. Don't tell anyone or you're a tattletale. Then we get to see Ada's perspective of this scene where the kids are found hiding under the stairs. She said that she was going downstairs to get a drink of water. And as she was climbing down the stairs, she saw Nico go into the wall. Climbing down the stairs, I'm sure technically is a way that you can say that. That's not a way I've ever heard anybody phrase that. Climbing down the stairs? Am I crazy? The more I say it, the more I think actually maybe that's fine. And I'm just being really nitpicky. It turns out that she was just crying in that scene because Nico told her that he didn't want to have a sleepover with her. No mystery there. No interesting explanation for that. When they go on the trip to the beach, Ada notices that Nico isn't responding to anything that Suzette or Jonathan says to him. There's obviously something going on, but she's not sure what. She then overhears bits of the conversation in the water that Millie had seen Nico having with Suzette. Okay, it tries to say that she can't hear well because there's water in her ears. But like I've said many times, this book is not going to leave anything up to your interpretation. So the words that it cuts out, it goes, don't even think, ... telling anyone. Literally just cutting out the word about, not taking any meaning from this sentence. It doesn't want you to hurt yourself. Fuck. And then also, Ada is just like her mother. The stupid apple doesn't fall far from the stupid tree. She goes, was she threatening him? This shit is not even forgivable from an 11-year-old's perspective. I'm tired of it. And then finally, Nico tells Ada everything. The first time he went over to do chores for Suzette and Jonathan, everything was normal. But the second time, he found a room under their stairs. He pushed aside a bookshelf, and there was a room just like in their new house. And this room was filled with toys, expensive, cool toys that their family would never be able to afford. Jonathan surprised Nico while he was in this room playing with the Transformers truck. Nico dropped the truck, and it broke. And Jonathan said, these are collector's items. With the money from the window that you broke and this truck that you've just broken, your family is going to owe me so much money. He's trying to scare Nico, and Nico is scared because he's constantly hearing his parents talk about how broke they are. So Jonathan says, you know what? I have another way that you can pay me off. I've been thinking of making my own toys. So you need to come over and play with the toys in this room and tell me which ones you like the best while I watch from a camera, okay? Obviously, there's a sexual component to this. Obviously, something creepy is going on with this, but it never actually pushes it all the way with that. One time, Nico was in here playing with the toys while Jonathan watched, and he tried to get out to go to the bathroom, and he realized he was locked in there, and he ended up peeing his pants. And Jonathan laughed at him, and he told him he was going to tell all of Nico's friends about him peeing his pants. Then Suzette found out about what was going on, and she made Jonathan tell Millie that they didn't need Nico's help anymore. But Jonathan, in private, told Nico that he would still have to come over, and he didn't have a choice in the matter. His threats went from "your parents will have no money" to "I will kill your entire family if you tell anyone or if you stop coming over." So this is kind of what I mean when I say that knowing that this is a book in a series kind of takes away the stakes, because you know that nothing is ever going to disrupt the main character's family unit. Yes, we as the reader understand that there is a horrible sexual component to this, but Nico is never directly victimized in that way. Nothing ever ruptures the fabric of this family. Nothing happens that they would feel the need to address, whether or not they objectively should address it. Not that I want child abuse to happen in this book or that I think it's necessary. I do think that this plotline is absolutely fine how it is. It just feels like a very obvious sidestepping to me that I don't think would feel that way in an actual standalone story. I think this also becomes more clear in the way the family and the narrative treats what Ada does next. What Ada does next is go over to Jonathan's house to talk to him and tell him to leave her little brother alone. And you would be shocked at how little tension is created in a scene where Ada is snooping around the house of a child predator, a scene that you know ends in his death. Again, there is no author putting herself in her character's shoes here. There is no understanding of their emotions in any given situation, and it reads so flat. When Ada heads over, by the way, she sees her dad working in the backyard, and she thinks, "I almost waved to get his attention, but then I realize if he sees me, he'll ask me what I'm doing. So it's actually better he doesn't know I'm here." Now, sure, that could be a quirk of an 11-year-old's writing, that she's explaining really obvious things to us, but that is how Millie, the 40-year-old, has been speaking for this entire book. That entire last clause could be cut. That is not even really a conclusion that we're drawing. That is just like obviously what the sentence she's saying means, and yet it still explains it to us. It's so horrible. The writing is just so bad. It feels like I'm being spoken down to at every turn, even by an 11-year-old narrator. In the house, she can't find Jonathan, but she does get really curious about the little room under the stairs. So she pushes the bookshelf to the side. She looks in at the toys, and she sees that there's actually a bed in there. Pulls the blankets back, sees this huge brown stain on the bed. And then Jonathan appears in the doorway. And he says, "What are you doing in here?" And she's like, sorry. And then she thinks, why am I apologizing? I sound like my mom. She's always apologizing for things she didn't even do wrong. And now I'm doing it. This is driving me fucking nuts. Again, this is what I mean when I say these characters have no inner world, because in what universe is that what she's thinking about? That makes no sense for that to be the thought that she has in the moment that she's been caught by this man who has been preying on her, not son, her brother, that's the word. I'm getting so flustered. I hate this book so much. She thinks, I sound like my mom right now. And that's because that's the note this book is trying to end on. Like mother, like daughter. Then she thinks to herself, I shouldn't apologize. He's the one who's been locking my brother in this room. And what are these stains all over the sheets that look suspiciously like dried blood? Wait, you're telling me it was blood on the sheets? Are you joking? I thought it was human shit. Jonathan sees that the blanket has been pulled back, and he tells Ada that he can't let her leave now that she's seen this blood stain. And so she stabs him in the stomach, and she runs home and leaves him staggering about his house. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? Jonathan's throat was cut. Hold that thought, because it does get even more stupid than the 11-year-old is the murderer. There is more to it. Fucking hell. Now that we're finally through Ada's long-ass confession, we go back to Millie's perspective. She's thinking like, damn, my daughter killed a man. That's crazy. Then she feels sick knowing what was happening between Jonathan and Nico right under her nose. But then immediately her next thought, literally thought number 3, after hearing this confession that her daughter killed a man, is, well, in my defense, when I sent Nico over there, it seemed harmless. This reads as incredibly unrealistic to me. I think that humans, especially parents, have an enormous propensity to blame themselves for things, and I don't think that her third thought would be a justification of her actions. And shoving the guilt off of her own shoulders. In my mind, I think it would take her years to actually convince herself that she wasn't guilty. And to be clear, she isn't guilty, but I don't think that this is how human minds work. Maybe I can see this as being something that she thinks to try to push away her regrets in this moment of unbearable clarity, but that isn't what it is because this never comes up again. She has just fully justified this to herself. She has convinced herself that she has no guilt. Again, while I believe that she has no guilt, I think it would take her years to get to that point. Then she gets a call from Enzo in the prison, and she says, I pick up my phone and I jam my thumb into the green button. Always what I have to say is you can simplify this. You can say, I pick up the phone if you want to tell us that she picked up the phone. But what I also want to say is green button. This is an iPhone. Boomer core. Enzo says, I only have 5 minutes, but I can't let Ada go to prison for this. Cecilia told me not to confess today, but I'm going to confess tomorrow. That's basically the sum of their conversation. I think they each exchange like 5 sentences to each other, and then it says the 5 minutes is up. There's no indication that anything else has happened in this conversation. And while it is certainly a conversation of high emotional intensity, there's probably big breaks. They're probably both crying. I read this with my partner, kind of like a script, trying to give it some natural pauses, and we couldn't get it to be more than 2 minutes. That's annoying. Most of what happens is just Millie thinking about things, and then it says 5 minutes is up. I think this is a nitpick. I also think that the police are pigs, and obviously prison guards are going to be like, your 5 minutes is up long before it actually is. But it was distracting to me. I also think it's distracting, like, Cecilia won't let me confess today, but I'm going to confess tomorrow. That obviously is just serving the narrative that has no logic to it. He's currently in a holding cell. Why is he saying, I'm going to confess tomorrow? It's so that everyone has a chance to figure it out for him. Like, that's it. That's literally it. Whatever. Millie thinks tonight, Enzo will spend the night in a cold, uncomfortable holding cell. Actually, it's the summer, so it will be a hot, uncomfortable holding cell. Read the room. Why are we saying that? The next day, Millie takes the kids to the bus stop and she has a confrontation with Janice. She finally puts Janice in her place. And I was wrong about Janice being really over the top in her cruelty as a misdirect. No, she's just like that. She is literally just like that. We have seen how the women in this story are treated. I can only say it so many times. I think that it's kind of crazy. Like, she has such little significance in the story compared to how important she seems like she's going to be in the beginning. And I don't really know if that's deliberate. I think that most people coming into this book are not reading it as a standalone like I am. I think they're reading it as part of the series. And they know, like I didn't, that the housemaid in the title is referring to Millie. So when Janice is watching from the windows, that doesn't mean anything in regards to the title to most readers. So I don't really get what the point of her was at all. Then Millie's friend Benny comes to pick her up. And like the book, I'm going to glaze over the fact that they're in Long Island and this is an NYPD detective that somehow knows everything about her husband's case and all of the evidence in the police's possession basically as soon as they get it. He picks her up. He tells her, Millie, I need to talk to you. They found Suzette's fingerprints in that little room with the toys. And for some reason, this is a massive shock to Millie because it does mean that Suzette knew about everything that was going on. But I thought that that was already pretty clear in the fact that part of Ada's confession is Nico's story, which says that Suzette found out what was going on and made Jonathan fire Nico. I also don't think that finding her fingerprints in this little room means that she always knew what was happening with Jonathan and what he was doing all along. She could have just found it at the end. Like, that is not tracking for me. Then Benny says they found something else as well. And Millie goes, the next thing he tells me makes me want to throw up all over this car. I don't know why it's prolonging the reveal that Jonathan killed that kid who went missing, Brayden. I don't think I have made it as clear as the book makes it, but it's obvious from the moment that Nico finds this room that that is what has happened. So why Millie in this moment doesn't tell us what the detective tells her, I don't get it. It's ridiculous. Millie's like, you need to take me to Suzette right now. And he goes, Millie, I would be fired. And she's like, you owe me one. And he's like, well, I owe you at least 10. So now we're using the first 2 books to cover up the logical inconsistencies in this one. So that's cool. They go to Suzette's hotel room before the police show up to arrest her. And they tell her that Brayden's DNA was found in the room under the stairs. And so were her fingerprints. And she says, I knew he killed Brayden and I hated him. And I wanted to turn him in, but I didn't want to ruin my reputation because that's all that matters to women like Suzette. And she says, I also wanted to keep an eye on him and make sure he didn't do this to any other young boys. They basically tell her, you should confess to killing your husband because you found out about what happened with Brayden. Otherwise, you're going to be tried as an accomplice. But this way, no one is going to blame you for killing him, and you might even get off scot-free. And she's basically like, yeah, okay, I'll confess. And then everything's fine. And then it's all good. The story ends with Ada standing up for herself against another boy that's bothering her by telling him that she's going to cut his balls off if he ever talks to her again, which I do kind of think is a little bit beyond 11 years old, but also I will say I was very sheltered as an 11-year-old, so I could be wrong on that. The end of Ada's last chapter has her looking at her reflection and thinking, everyone has always told me that I look like my dad, but I look just like my mom. How funny. Now, I know that this is meant to bring the series full circle. It's all coming back because her mom also stands up for victims of violent men or something like that. I understand that it would be more satisfying and makes more sense in the context of the rest of the book, so I'm not going to complain about it too much, but I will say I think it's really fucking corny. Then there's a stupid fucking epilogue, and we hear from Martha the housekeeper. She tells us that she knew who Millie was because she worked for the family of the boy that Millie killed as a teenager. And she knew that Millie and Enzo helped women escape abusive situations. She was working up the courage to talk to them about what was going on with her. I don't really understand why Martha would steal from them. I mean, I know her reasoning, I know her motive, but she worked multiple times a week for a much more wealthy family in a much nicer house. They are much worse people. Why is she taking this cheap necklace from Millie? It only makes sense narratively, not in her actual character motivations if she wanted their help. Martha was about to leave Long Island with Enzo's help when she decided to sneak into Suzette and Jonathan's house one last time to steal some necklaces to fund her getaway. But when she went in, she ran into Jonathan, and she was caught red-handed with the necklaces in her hand. And she sees that Jonathan is clutching his stomach and cursing under his breath. And so Martha is the one that slits Jonathan's throat. And that's the story. That's actually the story. I'm not joking. That's actually the story. Both Ada and Martha were the killers. The twists aren't even twists. They're just absolutely ridiculous. It's not satisfying that Ada is revealed to be the killer or one of the killers because we don't know Ada very well. And I think that could have been something. That could have been saying something about how Millie was so focused on this fantasy life and on her suspicions about her husband cheating on her that she wasn't paying attention to her children. But that never felt like the intention. It felt like this was meant to be a girl boss moment for Ada that is predicated on the first two books in the series. And that kind of just blows because those first two books have been entirely unimportant. I know it's ridiculous for me as someone who has not read the first two books to complain about this relying on the first two books at the end, but I think I do have a leg to stand on here. It literally says in the Goodreads write-up for this book that it can be read as a standalone story. It is marketed as both a part of the Housemaid series and its own book, and I think it fails at being either of those things. I doubt that this would be all that much more satisfying if you were reading it as a fan of the series, because on the whole, it's not really trying to cater to you at all. Sure, there are a few fan service references, but mostly it fully explains things from the previous series as though it expects its reader to be someone who hasn't engaged with the other two books. There was too much fear in even the smallest of negative outcomes for Millie's family, so you knew that things were always going to end up okay for them, and that meant that there were absolutely no stakes, there was no tension, there was no urgency in anything. It was all going to be wrapped up beautifully. The only positive thing I have to say about this very poorly planned, developed, written book was that it was very quick and easy to read, but that is also at the same time my main complaint. It was too easy to read. This book, I've said it many times, does not allow you a moment to ponder, to interpret, to think about anything for even more than 1 second. And that makes it impossible to care about the characters or what happens to them. As expected, this book sucked big balls, and I fucking loved hating it. I had a great time hating it. I think maybe one day I will give Frida McFadden a little bit of a more fair chance by reading a book that's not number 3 in a series. However, she has perfectly met my very low expectations with this. Thank you for coming along on this journey. I'll see you later. Goodbye. Actually, I'm also going to say join the book club because I always forget to say that. You should join the book club. Link in bio.